So today I have the pleasure of talking with Paola Natalucci from Flowing English. Paola, thank you very much for being here. Could you please just tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, thanks for the invite here. I am an Italian speaker who has learned English as a kid because, well, I was lucky. I had parents with a lot of foresight who said, well, we should send this one to learn English as soon as possible. I think it's going to be useful sometime in the 80s. And here I am. And I've worked as an English teacher, English and Italian teacher, actually, for most of my life. I'm a language nerd. I'm an intercultural nerd. I really love what I do. And well, I read about your project, and I was really enthusiastic. So I'm really glad to be here to discuss the perspective on non-native speakers of English with you. There's a lot to be talked about. I'm excited.
Thank you very much indeed. You're very, very interesting because I think you have a perspective from both sides of the language equation, if you like, in the sense that you're both a language teacher and a non-native speaker at clearly a very high level. Mm-hmm. What is it like living and working, let's say, in English as a second language?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is exhaustion as a keyword. Not for me personally, because I don't feel exhausted after speaking English, but that's just because I have spoken it for a long, long time. I had my first English class at 3 and I'm 40 now. So it's obviously been a part of my life for ages. But when you talk to a lot of non-native speakers who have to work in English every day, the tiredness, the energy consumption of living and working in another language really comes up as a topic. So I can see this, for example, with my partner, whose English is really, really good. Even on a holiday, for example, we meet English speakers, we have a chat. And if it goes on for a while, I can see that I'm fine, fresh and happy. And he's like, oh yeah, that was cool, but I'm so tired. And I can remember that when I worked in a multinational company, whenever they had the chance, for example, Spanish speakers, as we are living in Spain, I'm living in Barcelona right now. They said, well, if everyone speaks Spanish here, is it okay if I make my speech in Spanish, because it's very tiring for me in English. It's not that they can't, it's that it will use up a lot of mental and emotional energy that they can otherwise use during their workday in other ways. And so we did it in Spanish.
Very interesting you say about your partner, that he's got a high level of English and yet still finds it very tiring to have to communicate all day in that second language. I wonder if native English speakers are aware of that. And I was just wondering, have you ever experienced problems or seen problems in the way that native English speakers communicate when they're working with a multilingual group in English?
Yes. I mean, there are recurring things that I've noticed, and it's also the recurring things that people like my partner or my other language speaking colleagues told me. And a lot of the time it's related to speed, accents, and idioms. And so they feel that native speakers speak too fast. Some accents are more obscure than others. Maybe I think personally, language coach note, I think this has a lot to do with exposure, quite obviously. So a lot of people seem to find American English more understandable than British English or other Englishes, Australian or New Zealand. They find those really hard. And that's because we have way less media coming from those countries. And Australian has so much weird vocabulary weird to a non-native speaker, like, what's that? Like, they have to actually look it up on Google.
Yeah.
So speed, accent, and specific vocabulary of the different variations of English, and idioms, which are really very common in English, are super confusing because from the point of view of actual literal meaning, they're super obscure. They don't understand. So some of the more common ones, they get used to them. But I think a lot of non-native speakers aren't aware of just how many idioms they use all the time. Which on the one hand is the beauty of English. It's one of the things that is a characteristic of English. But at the same time, it's what makes mutual understanding so hard. And in some business or educational contexts or other contexts, like, for example, health, it's really vital to understand each other very, very clearly.
Yes. Yes.
Because the stakes are high.
Yes, I like your point there, that these potential problems in language can reduce mutual understanding. And I'm personally very strong in the belief that communication is a shared responsibility. It's not simply the job of the non-native speakers to improve their English to a certain level. I think that native speakers too could also adapt the way that they communicate. And there's a lot of benefit to doing that, both in terms of improving profit, in terms of meeting deadlines within a team or a company, and also just on a human level. It can be quite fascinating to be able to communicate better and understand each other more and build better relationships. I know that you're a language coach, and you work in Neurolanguage. Thinking about things on both sides of the equation, what advice would you give non-native speakers who are using English as a second language when they are talking with native speakers and perhaps they don't understand something, or there are lots of idioms, or the speed of speech is too fast? What would you say to the non-native speaker about that? What advice would you give them?
This is a really huge issue because non-native speakers feel a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of fear of losing face. Yeah. People tend to think that that's an issue only with Asian employees or colleagues, but actually, I think it's way more widespread. We just don't call it losing face. But there is this really strong fear of looking or sounding stupid. Okay. People are afraid of sounding stupid or incompetent. And what I always say, well, actually asking to clarify is a demonstration that you're listening and that you want to collaborate and in the best way possible. So I would say probably, but not being afraid of asking to repeat or clarify, or even repeat the idiom and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand this expression. What does it mean? I think English speakers are really welcoming. They don't get offended if you say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. They don't get upset or angry. I always felt really welcome to ask questions, and I try to transmit this relaxedness to my coachees, because there is no need to attach so much significance to not understanding something in language. It says nothing about your intelligence, and it says nothing about your education. Because imagine if you flipped sides and the other person had to understand you, it would be a total disaster because they probably don't speak your language. So what I try to do is usually help my coaches to work on self-confidence, actually, because a lot of this is inside them. If non-native speakers never say anything, native speakers will never realize that they are contributing to non-understanding and therefore to mistakes in projects or delays in projects, because they are not understood. So you're actually making a contribution by saying, could you please repeat? And not be afraid to look stupid, because nobody is stupid. Everybody's just trying to get the job done, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. And your point about the fear of saying I don't understand, the fear of losing face, to use an idiom, I suspect is a very powerful reason why people are afraid to speak out and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And yes, I love the way in which you, through your coaching, are trying to encourage people to say, look, it's okay to say, I don't understand. Please repeat that or use different words. Is there a role for native speakers to model that behavior, as it were, or to, I don't know, perhaps communicate about communication, and to say at the beginning of a team meeting or when you first start working together, to acknowledge the problem and say, look, if I'm speaking too fast, tell me. Can native speakers help by opening up that area?
Yes, of course. Of course. They can and they should, actually, because especially if they are the main speaker somewhere, they're also in a position of authority, if you think about it. And them being in a position of authority increases the anxiety in the people who are listening, who will be absolutely ashamed to stop and say, I'm sorry, I'm not following. Could you explain it another way, or could you repeat? And then maybe at the end of the meeting, they will go to their colleague and say, hey, did you understand what he actually meant? And the colleague also doesn't know, and boom, the information is gone. So yes, it's really a good idea to explicitly say, you can stop me. I want you to stop me if I'm going too fast. I want you to tell me if I am going too fast, or if a concept is unclear or hazy, tell me and I will try to rephrase it. And there is no shame in that. I actually did it when I worked in Thailand. I was the team lead there. I was in a position of authority, and in Asia, it's a little different from here, as you probably know. And that's what I did. I said, okay, I'm supposed to be your team lead, and I get it. That's cool. But please make sure you tell me your honest opinion about what I'm doing, because you are also very competent professionals, and I want your opinion also because you are from here. You are Thai, you are Japanese, you know more than me how to deal with families, how to deal with students, how to transmit knowledge in a way that's effective for Asian students, because you are Asian and I'm not. So I need your insight. I really do. You are going to help us deliver education in a more effective way. And there was a lot of work in that regard. In that sense, I was put in the position of a native speaker, so to say. But it worked. And it worked by making it explicit that I wouldn't get offended, that I wouldn't get angry, that I wouldn't think they were stupid or incompetent. And I really, really meant what I was saying 100%. And we built a great team that way.
I was going to ask, did you see an improvement in not just communication, but in the corporate world, we would say KPIs, wouldn't we? Keep a if the communication improved because you'd modeled that behavior and acknowledged the issues of communication and tried to adapt the way you communicate and gave other people permission to question and ask for clarification. So from what you're saying, communication improved. You say you built a much better team. Did you find that you were able to meet objectives better that way and get things done more easily?
Actually, I wanted to say that it's even more from my perspective than giving permission to do something. It's actually encouraging, saying, I want this. I'll be happier if you say, you know what, Paola, this is a really terrible idea. You're talking about the idea, not about me. So I won't take it personally. It's fine. And actually what happened was that this really unleashed their creativity, which is really important in education. And they came up with stuff that I was really happy because we worked together for 4 years as a team. And at the end of those 4 years, we were working almost as equals, which was exactly what I wanted, because I think it creates better collaboration than hierarchy. But this is me.
One of the things that I've been making notes as you're talking, there's so much in what you say, it's for unleashing creativity, and you are expert. So you're focusing on the subject matter ability and the insights that people have, rather than language itself and the way that ideas are expressed. It's the fundamental contribution that is valuable. That's what you were bringing out from people in talking about communication. I just wondered, as we're coming to the end of our chat today, in your experience as a speaker of many languages and somebody who's worked with people who speak many different languages, do you think that people who speak more than one language and are communicating in their second language, let's say an Italian working in English, does it make you think differently, look at problems differently?
I think so, yes. I think it shapes. I mean, I grew up bilingual basically from the age of 3, and I always tell language learners that it's effort, but speaking English can really change your life, not just because of the opportunities it gives you, which is awesome, but also because, think about it from the perspective of an Italian speaker. Our language is only spoken in Italy. So imagine how much bigger your world becomes when you speak English. And then how much bigger it becomes when you learn French, which is spoken, yes, in France, but also in North Africa and West Africa. And then you learn Spanish, which is spoken in South America as well as Spain. Each language that you learn brings a lot of culture with it. And I think this is something that's underrated, because if you learn it well, and if you learn it, the language for me is a tool. The language you are learning is just a tool to a culture made of movies, books, geopolitics, journalism, so much stuff that informs your worldview and shapes you as a person. So I'm pretty sure that being a polyglot has made me literally a different person than I would have been if I only spoke Italian, because imagine if I had gone to Thailand speaking no English, what would I have done? Or I don't know, I could go to so many places and adapt. And I think it kind of makes you more cognitively flexible. I think it's also demonstrated by a lot of research by now that it's not just good to avoid Alzheimer's and this kind of degenerative diseases, but it somehow makes you more agile in a world like ours. And I'm really grateful that I learned English at a young age, because I think that growing up with 2 languages kind of demystified the whole thing about languages are difficult. No, they're just something you need to work on. And if you have the golden carrot of, I don't know, I want to watch movies, I want to get a visa to work somewhere, I want to travel and understand people, whatever, as long as you find your golden carrot of motivation and language goes from objective to tool, then you're good. And it's good for your brain as well.
Yes, and you mentioned that people who operate in a second language, they can bring a different cultural perspective, more agility in their thinking. It can be good personally, and therefore, I guess by extension, good for a team, for an organization. And the other thing I took from what you were saying there, and there's a lot that we could discuss, is that language needn't be difficult. And I'm guessing going back to the point about native speaker communication can be very problematic. But if people can learn English as a second language, it can't really be that difficult for native English speakers to learn how to adapt the English that they speak to improve communication.
Yes, I agree. And I think actually a lot of this has to do with empathy. And it's one of those buzzwords that are always out there now. But I think if anyone stopped for a second and thought about themselves in the shoes of the person they have in front of them, then unless they're a really, awful person, which most people are not, luckily, it would kind of come naturally to anybody to try to be helpful in being understood. So slowing down, avoiding complex vocabulary. And then, it's also, you need to fine tune to the person you have in front of you. You need to listen, because the way the person in front of you speaks, if you talk to me or you talk to my partner whose level is lower than mine, or you talk to a beginner, it's very different. You can use idioms with me. You can speak quickly with me. You don't need to pay attention to your accent. I'm fine. But if somebody struggles a little, then take it as a sign to slow down and be mindful of the words you use. So as I was saying in other contexts, it's about reading the room, and it's about feeling the room, which, granted, is not very popular in executive rooms to pay any attention to feelings. But this, I think, is not just rational, because it's about empathy. It's about wanting the other person to be comfortable. Neurolanguage coaching is all about that. You want to provide an environment of calm and relaxedness, and people just are empowered, even just by their brainwaves not freaking out. So perhaps native speakers could take a page from the manual of neurolanguage coaching, and, as I said before, mention explicitly that it's fine to interrupt. If there is no clarity, it's okay to ask for the meaning of something if it's unclear, and nobody will judge you as stupid or incompetent for it. And then look at the people, listen to the people in front of you. How are they feeling? Do they look bored? Do they look zoned out? Do they look worried, scared, stressed, exhausted? Because that's a huge part of effective public speaking, and it's also a really effective part of meetings. And that's why, even if it's annoying, cameras on in digital meetings are a good idea, because you can kind of monitor how much you're being listened to and how much you're being understood, actually.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Paola, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I'm sorry that we haven't got more time to continue it further. What you say is absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much indeed for your time, and for doing this recording with me. And I hope
you, James.
you continue to stay in touch. Thank you very much indeed.